Welcome in, Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of Vikings on SI right here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Will Ragatz. Will, before we jump into our 5 matches, do want to remind everybody to hit subscribe. Does help us get found. Helps you get notified when a new video gets posted here on the channel. Try to update or upload a new video or two every single day, talking all things Minnesota sports. Will, all right, let's jump into it. 5 matchups Thursday, a big one for the Vikings, an early one for Vikings fans on this side of the pond anyway, since the Vikings are over in London, traveling at the time of recording later on today over to London to take on the New York Jets. There's a lot of storylines here for this one for certain. Revenge game, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Jefferson, Sauce Gardner. There's a lot to digest here and dissect here. What's your number one matchup that will decide this weekend's game?
Yeah, I got to start with the guy who just earlier today before recording was named the NFC Offensive Player of the Month. Sam Darnold had an unbelievable September with the Vikings, I think exceeding any expectations externally. I don't even know if the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell thought Darnold was going to be this good this quickly for them. Maybe they did, but it's been really impressive. He leads the league in passing touchdowns. He leads the league in passer rating. He's top 5 in several other stats. The yardage totals haven't been crazy because the Vikings have spent so much time leading the season, but Darnold's been playing really well. And now he gets maybe his toughest test yet against this New York Jets defense that isn't off to the strongest start this year. If you go look at DVOA and EPA per play, things like that, those advanced metrics. I mean, they're still top 5 in scoring defense so far, right behind the Vikings at about 15 points a game. But last year, they were 3rd in DVOA. The year before that, they were 6th. Like, this is a really established, very good defense. And yes, the Vikings have played some good defenses. The 49ers have a good defense. The Texans, the Packers. Those are all very solid defenses with good players. I think this Jets one is just a little bit tougher because of the players they have really up and down the roster. I mean, we'll talk more about Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed in a second, but 2 great cornerbacks. Quinnen Williams, we'll also talk more about it. He's a wrecker, a game wrecker in the middle of the D-line. The linebackers are really good. Quincy Williams, CJ Mosley. They've got a bunch of dudes up front. I mean, people might not have heard of Will McDonald. He leads the team with 5 sacks. Solomon Thomas, and they've got a bunch of guys up front capable of rushing the passer. Javon Kinlaw, and it's a really good defense. So Sam Darnold is going to have to be on his game. And for as great as Darnold's been, he does have 5 turnover-worthy plays this year, according to PFF. So he's going to have to take care of the football in this game and continue to just make good decisions and operate Kevin O'Connell's offense at a high level if the Vikings are going to win this game.
If Sam Darnold can pass this Jets test, because this is, as you said, arguably one of the best defenses that the Vikings have faced this year, despite already facing a number of good defense. If he can pass this Jets test, where does this Sam Darnold conversation go to afterwards? Because you got the bye week, so there'll be a lot of time to just kind of sit on what we've seen over the first 5 weeks. Where does this conversation go with Sam Darnold if he passes this test on Sunday?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this game is fun because the Vikings are 4-0, and as dominant as they've looked, I think this one can shift the conversation one way or another as they go into 14 days without a game. If you win this, you're 5-0. You're guaranteed to remain atop the NFC and atop the NFC North. If Sam Darnold plays well against his Jets defense, even if he just kind of does what he's done so far, and let's say throws for like 270, 2 or 3 touchdowns, and maybe 1 interception, the Vikings win. Like, we just have to keep talking about him more and more at that point as a legitimate MVP candidate because we're almost a quarter of the way into the season. We're basically a quarter. We're getting close to being a third of the way into the season. The sample size is no longer super tiny. I mean, there's still a lot of a year left, three more months and change. But if he's able to pass this test, it's going to get really interesting with the conversations surrounding him. And then, the other thing could be true where if Darnold struggles in this game, maybe the Vikings lose their first game of the season. Then the question for 2 weeks heading into that Lions game is going to be, did they get exposed a little bit? Like, are they not actually as good as we made them out to be through 4 weeks? Especially if it's like they're trailing in this game and then things start going poorly because we just haven't seen them trailing at all this year. So this one is fascinating. we'll get to our predictions on the channel on Friday with the rest of the guys, but I do think the Vikings are going to win this game. I just also think it's going to be a tough test for Sam Darnold.
I don't mean to get too sidetracked here on five matchups Thursday, but that conversation about not having seen them trailed at all this season, is that as big of a deal as we're all making it out to be, or is this just trying to find a hole in this Vikings team?
Yeah, I think it's probably just trying to nitpick a little bit, but it is also a real thing. I mean, you can't deny just the facts are that the Vikings have not trailed since very early in the opener against the Giants. They've spent a lot of time this season leading by multiple scores, and it is a different game to some degree when you're trailing. But as Kevin O'Connell said this week, he thinks the Vikings will be ready when that does happen, and I think they will too. I don't think there's any reason why they're suddenly gonna, let's say they get down 7-0 in this game. That's their biggest deficit of the season. I don't think they'll suddenly go into some shell and panic and forget how to play football. But that is what the first quarter of this game is going to be big, because if they can start out the way they continue to start out and take a lead, that would be huge against this Jets defense, because if they fall behind, that team can really kind of pin its ears back and come after you.
Yeah, for sure. What's number two matchup that will define this game on Sunday?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit already, but we got to go with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison against the Jets cornerbacks Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, who I think have a case to be the best cornerback duo in the NFL. There's a few other teams, a few other duos that could be in that mix, but Gardner and Reed are about as good as it gets. I mean, Sauce Gardner, ever since coming into the league as a top 5 pick, has just been one of those shutdown guys with his combination of size and speed and just the fluidity of his hips and coverage. Like, he is a very, very good player. DJ Reed, not to be overlooked, is also a very, very good player in his own right. And Justin Jefferson, I asked him on Wednesday about that matchup, and he said he was looking forward to it because he's the ultimate competitor. He loves the matchups against these top cornerbacks. I think there's a part of him that was probably disappointed that Jair Alexander didn't play for the Packers last week, because he wanted to stick it to him and he wanted to gritty on him in the end zone. He had to settle for grittying on Keyshawn Nixon and the rest of the Packers after his 4th touchdown catch of the year. But he's looking forward to this one. Jefferson said he's eyeing a big yardage game, because when the Vikings hosted the Jets in 2022, he had 45 yards and a touchdown. It wasn't anything spectacular. The Vikings won the game, but he's looking to have a big game across the pond, much like he did in 2022 against Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints.
Question about this matchup, about, I guess, the wide receivers versus their cornerbacks. We've seen Darnold a couple times, going back to the Darnold conversation as well, looping that in. We've seen him a couple times this season just chuck it up to Jefferson when he's in trouble, and Jefferson's come down with it more times than not. With the matchups that they have this weekend, is that something he can reliably do, or is he going to have, is that going to have to change that little mindset there in those moments where he's a little bit pressured in the pocket? Can he just reliably, like he did against the Packers last week on that touchdown pass to Jefferson, just expect Jefferson to come down with it in a tight window like that? Or is this matchup too good to take those risks?
I think you still got to do it. I think as good as the opposing corners are, you got to trust the best receiver on the planet and give him opportunities to come down with contested catches. And if that means risking Sauce Gardner making a great play and come down with a pick, I think that just you can't be afraid to do that and to test those matchups and to give Jefferson opportunities, because he is your best player. He's the guy you got to lean on every single game. I think Jefferson is still due, might not be this week, but he's still due to have a huge kind of explosion game one of these weeks, because he only has 20 catches so far through 4 games. Yeah, I don't think he's exceeded 8 targets in a game yet. And again, a lot of that has to do with the Vikings leading for basically the entirety of these contests. But he's due for a big game soon, and I think Sam Darnold has to continue trusting him, even if he's tightly covered, double covered. You got to give him opportunities. And I do think having Addison back is massive, because if teams are showing a lot of attention to Jefferson, Dan Orlovsky was breaking this down on ESPN on the Vikings' first touchdown. The Packers were really shading coverage towards Jefferson and Naylor's side. They had a safety shading to that hash, and that left Addison one-on-one to just roast the corner with a little stop and go route. So having him back, a legitimate, very good number two, first round pick, is big for the Vikings as well.
What's been the key for Justin Jefferson's touchdown totals taking a little bit of a jump here? Because it's only 4, but it's 4 through 4 games. The most he's ever had in a season is 10. He had 5 last year, although he was injured for much of the season. But 4 through 4 games is already a nice trend upwards in that direction where he hasn't scored. Typically, it feels like a lot of touchdowns comparative to the amount of catches and yards he has in a season. What's been the key to that number feeling like it's kind of on an upward trend compared to past seasons?
Yeah, I think Jefferson's always been very capable of scoring a lot of touchdowns, and for a while in his younger days, Adam Thielen just seemed to gobble those up. I think
Yeah.
Thielen had 14 in 2020, something like that, maybe another 10 the next year. He was always seemed to be Kirk Cousins' go-to guy in a lot of those situations, and again, that could have something to do with Jefferson really drawing a lot of defensive attention. This year, I think Sam Darnold's playing really well in the red zone in general. A lot of his touchdowns are coming down there, except for obviously the 97 yarder where he was standing on his own goal line. But yeah, Jefferson is going to be the Vikings' number one read on a lot of those plays, and Kevin O'Connell is trusting Sam Darnold to throw the ball and get it done and score touchdowns in the red zone, and he's delivering so far. 6 different guys I think have a receiving touchdown for the Vikings, but Jefferson is always going to be the main target on those concepts that Kevin O'Connell draws up.
For sure. Number 3, what's the third matchup you're watching this weekend?
Yeah, last one on this side of the ball. It feels like something I talk about pretty often, but you have to, I think, in a game like this. It's Quinnen Williams against the interior of the Vikings offensive line. And Quinnen Williams is not off to the hottest start through this season's first month, but he's a guy who's had a PFF grade over 90 the last 2 years, 70 pressures last year. He's had double-digit sack seasons. He is a lot more in the Dexter Lawrence tier than just about anybody. Certainly than anybody that the Vikings have seen the last 3 weeks, between even Kenny Clark or Javon Hargrave or Malik Collins or whoever it was with the Texans. This is the best defensive tackle that they've seen since week 1, when Dexter Lawrence almost threatened to ruin their game, although the Giants didn't have anything else going. But Dexter Lawrence played really well in that game. Maybe kept it from being even more of a blowout. So yeah, this is going to be a huge one. Quinnen Williams is just a very, very good player. The Vikings have to be aware of him at all times. And I like some of the things that they've done. Maybe as an adjustment to what happened in week 1 in recent weeks, where sometimes you'll see Aaron Jones kind of come up and line up in between like Darnold and right behind one of the guards and be there for help in pass protection, or they'll have CJ Ham do that, and or they'll double, and you have Josh Oliver who you can use to help out one of the ends. But yeah, Quinnen Williams, a potential game wrecker and somebody the Vikings have to be very aware of.
Yeah, for sure. This is going to be a very tough test for the interior of this Vikings offensive line. You mentioned they had the tough test in week 1. How have they progressed, I guess, since then? I know Blake Brandel has earned a little bit of praise and for his play, but how have Garrett Bradbury and Ed Ingram, which I know has always been the main concern for a lot of Vikings fans, those two combined, who were just eaten alive by Dexter Lawrence in week 1, how have they progressed over the last 3 weeks?
Yeah, it's been solid. I would say definitely give credit to Blake Brandel, whose name you just haven't heard a whole lot through the first month, and that's a welcome sight for Vikings fans with the guard position, that they haven't really had to think or worry about him very much. Bradbury and Ingram is always going to be top of mind, basically going into every game, and that was the case last week. And I don't think Kenny Clark had a huge impact on that game. There's always going to be some plays where Bradbury and Ingram lose a rep or just struggle a little bit because they are not just inherently the greatest pass blockers from that position. And as we've talked about all along, that's something the Vikings just kind of live with because of what they give you as run blockers and kind of some of the physicality that they bring in that regard. So it's been fine. It hasn't been a disaster, but this week has disaster potential if Bradbury and Ingram aren't on their game.
For sure. What's number 4? I feel like we're going to switch sides of the ball here at this point
We are
in the conversation.
We are, yeah. I usually try to divide it up 3 and 2 on the
Yeah.
other sides of the ball or something like that. But yeah, we're gonna go to the other side of the ball, and it's the obvious one. It's Aaron Rodgers against this Vikings defense as a whole. Brian Flores, coaching wise, but the entire defense and Rodgers. He's old, but he does not appear to have really lost a step. And yes, they've struggled a little bit so far, the Jets, and the offense has been a bit up and down. They're 2-2. They're not scoring a ton of points. Like the overall numbers offensively don't look great. They just lost 10-9 to a Broncos team that got 60 passing yards from Bo Nix, and Rodgers was getting pummeled in that game. He was getting hit a ton. He was getting sacked. He was under a total kind of just. It was a mess for the Jets offensive line for Rodgers. The Broncos were blitzing him at a really high rate, which I think is something the Vikings are going to do this week. Brian Flores has been known to dial up a blitz or two, and will have obviously studied that tape pretty closely. But with all of that said, Rodgers by himself is still playing at a really high level. I mean, the arm talent is still there. The mental quickness and his mastery of the game from that standpoint still appears to be there. This guy had 7 big time throws according to PFF, which I think is 4th in the league or something like that, and he has 0 turnover worthy plays. And I talked about Darnold has 5 big time throws, 5 turnover worthy plays. Rodgers is at 7-0. He's the only quarterback with at least 50 dropbacks in the NFL without a turnover worthy play. So he's taking care of the ball really well, like he always does. I mean, he always posted historically low interception percentages during his prime run with the Packers. He's not going to, feed into the Vikings takeaway machine most likely. And then he still has the arm talent to really deliver and find Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams and Alan Lazard and Tyler Conklin and all these guys. So the Vikings have to play well. I'm fascinated to see what Flores' plan looks like, and I assume it's going to be blitz heavy, but what is the whole disguise and all of the what are all the looks that he's going to throw at Rodgers? And then the Vikings defenders, another thing, they have to be on their game in terms of the cadence element, and that's been a big talker in New York this week. Is the Jets had some like pre-snap penalties because of Rodgers' hard counts and cadences and things like that. And then I think Robert Saleh said something about it. It became a little bit of a drama, but they've walked that back this week. They are going to lean into Rodgers doing that because that's something he's always been great at, is manipulating the cadences, trying to get those free plays out of defenders jumping offside. So everybody on the Vikings defense, from the D line to the back end, they've got to be disciplined, and they've got to come ready to play against one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen.
Your 5th and final important matchup that will decide Sunday's game between the Vikings and Jets at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
Yeah, the last one I had was sticking on that same side of the ball. And it's the Vikings edge rushers, Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, against the Jets offensive tackles, who have not played particularly well this season. This Jets O-line, it's not great. And Rodgers has great, skill position weapons, and he's a great quarterback. But if there's a weakness on that offense, it's the line, and that's something the Vikings have to take advantage of. And I think they can with the kind of seasons that Grenard and Van Ginkel and Pat Jones, all these guys are having. Maybe Dallas Turner continues to mix in a little bit more. We didn't see him a whole lot last week, but Tyron Smith is the Jets left tackle. He's getting up there in years, and he leads their team with 12 pressures allowed, 3 sacks allowed. On the right side, Morgan Moses is another veteran, but he's been hurt, so it's been the rookie Olu Fashanu, who has a lot of long-term upside, but has kind of struggled out of the gates. So whether that's Fashanu or Moses over there, that's a matchup I think Jonathan Grenard is going to look at favorably for himself. So yeah, as the Vikings are trying to get pressure on Rodgers, which is going to be key, trying to replicate what the Broncos were able to do against him last week. Just those matchups with their outside linebackers against the Jets tackles, that's going to be kind of at the heart of it.
Yeah, looking forward to it. This is a big one for the Vikings with the bye week. The following week, we'll certainly have a lot to talk about coming out of that game. And thankfully, we don't have to face Devontae Adams on the New York Jets yet, because that'll probably happen, because everybody who formerly played for the Packers, just kind of has gravitated towards Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets in the past couple of years. So thankfully we don't have to deal with that. We get the current crop of Jets wide receivers. But looking forward to it. Go read Will's work over on Vikings, Timberwolves, Twins. Go for some Badgers on SI. Once again, remember, hit subscribe. Does help us get found. Notifies you whenever we post a new video. Trying to do that once or twice a day here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Minnesota sports fans, we'll be back again tomorrow. Predictions on the way for this game coming up. Sunday morning, 8:30 kickoff. Who's ready for some Sunday morning football? Love it. Football all day long. We'll talk to you later.
Yep.